Hyunwoo Park stood on the bridge of his ship, watching the stars through the wide window. He had been a commander in the Earth Defense Fleet for 10 years, but he had never seen anything like this before. The communication screen in front of him showed red warning lights flashing across 12 different star systems. "Sir, we are getting more distress calls," said his second officer, a young woman named Mira. Her voice was shaking. "The colonies at New Seoul, New Busan, and Terra Nova have all gone silent." Hyunwoo felt his stomach drop. 3 more colonies lost in just 2 days. That made 8 colonies completely destroyed in less than 2 weeks. Nobody knew who was attacking them or why. The enemy ships appeared out of nowhere, destroyed everything, and disappeared before Earth's defense fleets could reach them. "What about the other colonies?" Hyunwoo asked. "New Incheon and Aurora Station are still fighting, but they say the enemy ships are too strong. Their weapons cannot break through the enemy shields," Mira replied, reading from her screen. On Earth, Dr. Ji-won Kim was working late in her laboratory. She was one of Earth's best scientists who studied alien life forms. Usually her job was peaceful, examining strange plants and animals that explorers brought back from distant planets. But tonight was different. Tonight, she was looking at pieces of an enemy ship that had been shot down over New Seoul before the colony was destroyed. The metal was unlike anything she had ever seen. It seemed to bend light around itself, making it hard to see clearly. When she touched it with her instruments, it felt warm, almost like it was alive. But the strangest thing was inside the ship. There were no normal control panels or computers. Instead, there were strange wet tubes that looked almost like blood vessels. "This is not just a machine," Ji-won said to herself. "This is something else." Far away on New Seoul Colony, Tae-ho Lee was hiding in the ruins of what used to be the main city. He had been a factory worker before the attack. Now he was one of the few survivors trying to stay alive. The enemy had not just destroyed the buildings, they had taken people. Tae-ho had watched from his hiding place as strange, tall creatures loaded humans onto their ships. The creatures looked almost human, but their movements were wrong. They moved too smoothly, like they were floating instead of walking. Their eyes were completely black, and when they spoke to each other, the sounds were not like any language Tae-ho had ever heard. But the worst part was that some of the creatures looked exactly like people from the colony. Tae-ho had seen his neighbor Mrs. Park walking with the aliens, but something was wrong with her. She moved the same strange way they did, and her eyes were now completely black too. Tae-ho had managed to build a small radio from parts he found in the ruins. He spent his nights trying to contact other survivors and send messages to Earth. Most of the time he only heard static, but sometimes he heard voices. Other people like him hiding and afraid, trying to understand what had happened to their world. Back on Earth, So Young Choi was working day and night in the biggest engineering facility on the planet. She was one of the smartest engineers Earth had ever produced, and now everyone was looking to her for answers. Her job was to figure out how the enemy weapons worked and how to stop them. The enemy ships had some kind of energy shield that made Earth's weapons useless. Even the strongest missiles just bounced off without doing any damage. But So Young had noticed something strange in the battle recordings. Sometimes, for just a moment, the shields seemed to flicker. "There has to be a weakness," So Young said to her team of engineers. "Nothing is perfect. We just have to find the right way to attack." She had been studying the pieces of the enemy ship that Dr. Ji-won had sent her. The technology was incredibly advanced, but it was also different from anything humans had ever built. It seemed to work more like a living thing than a machine. Admiral Dong-min Yoon was in the biggest meeting room on Earth, surrounded by screens showing maps of all human colonies. Red X marks showed where colonies had been destroyed. Yellow marks showed where battles were still happening. Only 4 green marks remained, the colonies that were still safe. The leaders of Earth's government sat around the table, all looking worried and scared. Some wanted to surrender before more people died. Others wanted to fight until the end. But everyone was asking the same question: who was attacking them, and what did they want? "Sir," said an officer, running into the room, "we are receiving a transmission from the enemy fleet." The main screen changed to show space near Earth's moon. Hundreds of dark ships appeared, bigger than anything Earth had ever built. They were not attacking yet, but they were clearly waiting for something. Then, a voice spoke. It was speaking perfect human language, but something about it sounded wrong. Like multiple people were talking at the same time. "People of Earth," the voice said. "I am War Prime Kethmore of the Velkaran Empire. Your species has spread to worlds that belong to us. Your colonies have been removed. Now you will surrender your home world, or you will be destroyed like the others." The screen showed images of the destroyed colonies. Cities turned to ash, ships broken and floating in space. Thousands of humans being loaded onto enemy ships like cargo. "You have 30 of your days to decide," the voice continued. "Surrender, completely, and some of your people will be allowed to live as our servants. Refuse, and every human in this galaxy will die. Choose wisely." The transmission ended, leaving the room in complete silence. Admiral Dongmin looked around the table at the frightened faces of Earth's leaders. In 30 days, humanity would have to make the most important choice in their history. Surrender, and become slaves or fight and probably die. But as he looked at the red marks on the map showing all the destroyed colonies, Dongmin felt something he had not expected. He did not feel fear or sadness. He felt anger. These aliens had attacked innocent people, destroyed entire worlds, and now they wanted humanity to just give up. 30 days, Dongmin said quietly. Then we show them what happens when someone threatens Earth. Outside the window, the alien ships waited in the darkness of space, confident that humanity would make the same choice every other species had made before them. They had no idea that humans were different. They had no idea that humanity was about to choose their own destiny. The next morning, something amazing happened across Earth. Instead of panic and fear, people started working together like never before. In every city, in every country, humans began preparing to fight back. Yanwu Park was in the command center, coordinating with anyone who could still fight. His communication screens showed contacts from all over human space. Resistance fighters on occupied colonies, military ships hiding behind asteroids, and even some enemy ships that seemed to be sending secret messages. "Commander," Mira said, looking surprised at her screen. "I am getting a signal from New Seoul. It is Tae-Ho Lee, one of the survivors." Hyun-woo immediately opened the channel. The voice that came through was tired but determined. "This is Tae-Ho Lee calling any Earth forces. I have important information about the enemy. They are not what they seem to be. This is Commander Park. Tell me what you have learned. The aliens are using our people somehow. I have seen my neighbors walking with them, but they are different. Their eyes turn black, and they move strangely. I think the aliens are controlling them somehow." Hyun-woo wrote down this information quickly. If the enemy could control human minds, that changed everything about how they would need to fight. In her laboratory, Dr. Jiwon Kim was making discoveries that surprised even her. She had been studying the strange biological parts from the enemy ship for days. What she found was shocking. The creatures were not really aliens at all. They were parasites, tiny organisms that lived inside other creatures' bodies and controlled them. The aliens that people had seen were actually members of different species that had been taken over by these parasites. Jiwon looked at the samples under her microscope and saw the tiny worm-like creatures moving around. They seemed to attach themselves to the brain and nervous system of their host. But when she tested them against human brain tissue, something strange happened. The parasites could not attach properly to human brain cells. "This is incredible," Jiwon said to herself. Humans might be naturally resistant to their mind control. She immediately called Admiral Dongmin to report her findings. Meanwhile, So Young Choi was working with the largest team of engineers and scientists Earth had ever put together. Every smart person on the planet was helping to build new weapons and defenses. They had only 30 days, so everyone worked without stopping. So Young had been studying the enemy technology, trying to understand how their shields worked. She discovered that the shields used a type of energy that humans had never seen before. But she also found something interesting. The shields had to be powered by something, and that something might have weaknesses. If we can find the right Frequency, So Young explained to her team. We might be able to disrupt their shields, but we need to build completely new weapons to do it. Her team worked day and night, building and testing new types of guns and missiles. Some of the designs failed completely. Others showed promise. Slowly, they began to develop weapons that might actually work against the enemy. On New Sol, Taeho Lee was doing something nobody expected. Instead of just hiding, he was trying to communicate with the other species that the parasites had taken over. He had noticed that sometimes the controlled beings seemed to fight against the parasites inside them. One day, while hiding in an old warehouse, Taeho saw one of the controlled aliens suddenly stop moving and grab its head like it was in pain. For just a moment, its eyes changed from black to a bright blue color. Taeho took a chance and spoke to it. Can you understand me? Are you fighting the thing inside you? The creature looked at him with the blue eyes and nodded slightly. Then it pointed to itself and said one word. Threnny. That was the beginning of something important. Taeho learned that the Threnny were just one of many species that had been conquered by the parasites. The parasites called themselves Velkarans, and they had been taking over entire galaxies for thousands of years. But some of the controlled beings could still think and feel. They were trapped inside their own bodies, forced to watch as the parasites used them to attack other worlds. They wanted to be free, but they did not know how. Taeho began secretly meeting with these trapped minds. He learned about other species, the Mokari, who were great builders, and the Veltar, who knew about space travel. All of them had been conquered by the Velkarans, but none of them wanted to be. If we could free them, Taeho reported to Hyunwoo, we might have allies instead of enemies. Admiral Dongmin was in meetings every day with Earth's leaders and military commanders. The news from Dr. Jiwon about human resistance to the parasites was the first good news they had received. The possibility of allies that Taeho had reported was even better. But Dongmin knew they needed more than good news. They needed a plan. Here is what we are going to do, Dongmin announced to the assembled leaders. We are not going to surrender, and we are not going to just defend Earth. We are going to fight back. The plan was called Operation Phoenix. Every factory on Earth would start making weapons and ships. Every person who could fight would be trained. Every scientist would work on new technology. And instead of waiting for the Velkarans to attack, humanity would strike first. We have learned that these parasites have conquered many species, Dongmin continued, but they have never fought humans before. They do not know what we are capable of when we choose to fight. Around the world, humans began preparing for war like never before. But this was not like the old wars between human nations. This was different. This was about the survival of not just humanity, but all the species the Velkarans had enslaved. So Young's engineering teams worked around the clock building new weapons. Dr. Jiwon's scientists developed ways to detect and possibly remove the parasites. Hyunwoo organized the space fleets and coordinated with resistance fighters on other worlds. And slowly, a network of communication grew between Earth and the occupied colonies. Taeho and other survivors began organizing the trapped alien minds into a secret resistance movement. The Velkarans had given humanity 30 days to surrender. They expected fear and submission, like every other species had shown. They had never encountered a species that responded to threats by getting angry and fighting back. On day 20 of the 30-day deadline, Admiral Dongmin sent a message back to War Prime Kethmore. You have attacked our colonies and threatened our people. You think we will surrender like others have before us, but you do not understand humans. We do not surrender, we do not give up, and we do not let bullies win. The message continued. We know what you really are. We know about the UR species you have enslaved, and we are going to free them all. This is our choice, and we choose to fight. The Velkaran fleet near Earth's moon did not respond immediately. War Prime Kethmore had never received a message like that before. In all the thousands of years of conquest, no species had ever threatened to free other species. But Kethmore was not worried. Humans were just another primitive species that would be crushed like all the others. The parasites had weapons and technology that no one could resist, What Kethmore did not know was that humanity had spent 30 days preparing for something no one had ever tried before. They were not just preparing to defend themselves. They were preparing to liberate an entire galaxy. The 30 days ended at exactly midnight, Earth time. The Velkaran fleet had been waiting patiently near Earth's moon, expecting humanity to surrender at the last moment like every other species had done before them. Instead, they received something completely unexpected. At 12:01 a.m., every human military ship in the solar system powered up their engines and began moving toward the enemy fleet. Leading them was Commander Hyan Woo Park in the flagship New Dawn, equipped with So Young Choi's newest weapons. War Prime Kethmore watched the approaching human ships with something like amusement. These primitive creatures actually thought they could fight the mighty Velkaran Empire. He would crush them quickly and then take their planet. All ships prepare to destroy the human fleet, Kethmore commanded through the parasite communication network. Leave no survivors. The space around Earth's moon erupted in light and fire as the two fleets collided. The Velkaran ships immediately activated their energy shields, confident that human weapons could not penetrate them. For the first few minutes, it seemed like they were right. Human missiles and energy beams bounced harmlessly off the enemy shields. But then, So Young's new weapons began to work. The electromagnetic pulse devices she had designed did not try to break through the shields. Instead, they sent out waves of energy at specific frequencies that disrupted the shield generators. One by one, Velkaran ships found their shields flickering and failing. Now, Hyanwoo commanded over the communication channel. Hit them while their shields are down. Human ships poured fire into the unprotected Velkaran vessels. For the first time in the war, human weapons were actually destroying enemy ships. The Velkarans were shocked. No species had ever found a way to defeat their shields before. But the battle was far from one-sided. The Velkaran ships had other weapons, gravity manipulators that crushed human ships like tin cans, and bioweapons that could kill entire crews in seconds. The human fleet was losing ships fast. "Sir," Mira reported, her voice tight with concern. "We have lost 60% of our ships. The enemy still has most of their fleet intact." Hyanwoo gritted his teeth. They had known this would be costly, but they had to succeed. Too much depended on this battle. "Focus all remaining ships on that large cruiser," he ordered, pointing to a Velkaran command ship. "If we can capture it intact, the sacrifice will be worth it." The surviving human ships concentrated their fire on the command cruiser. So Young's pulse weapons disrupted its shields just long enough for boarding pods to attach to its hull. Human Marines, wearing special armor designed to resist Velkaran bioweapons, cut their way into the ship. The fighting inside the ship was brutal and strange. The human Marines found themselves fighting not just against the parasite-controlled aliens, but also against the ship itself. The walls seemed to move and try to trap them. Strange gases filled the corridors, but the Marines had been trained for this. They fought their way to the ship's command center and captured it, along with several live parasites and the host bodies they had been controlling. When the battle finally ended, both sides had paid a terrible price. The human fleet was nearly destroyed. But 3 Velkaran ships had been completely destroyed, and 1 had been captured intact. Most importantly, humanity had proven that the Velkarans could be hurt. Dr. Ji-won Kim was waiting when the captured command ship was brought to Earth's orbital station. This was the chance she had been waiting for, to study living parasites and their hosts up close. What she discovered in the next few days changed everything humanity thought they knew about the war. The parasites were not evil conquerors seeking to build an empire. They were refugees running from something even worse. Their home galaxy was being consumed by a spreading darkness, some kind of expanding void that destroyed everything in its path. The parasites had fled their dying galaxy thousands of years ago, but their biology made it impossible for them to coexist peacefully with other species. They could only survive by taking control of host bodies, and once they did, they could not give up that control without dying. "They are not monsters," Ji-won reported to Admiral Dong-min. "They are desperate survivors who have been forced to become monsters by their own biology." But that was not the most important discovery. The most important thing was what Ji-Wan learned from the host bodies. Many of the species the parasites controlled were not actually dead or unconscious. Their minds were still active, trapped inside their own bodies, fully aware of everything the parasites made them do. And these trapped minds were angry. They had been forced to attack and destroy other species for thousands of years, watching helplessly as their bodies were used to spread suffering across the galaxy. When Ji-Wan found a way to communicate with them directly, they all said the same thing. Please help us. Please free us. Meanwhile, on New Sol and the other occupied colonies, Tae-Ho Lee was organizing the largest secret resistance movement in galactic history. Using the communication methods he had learned from the freed alien minds, he was now in contact with resistance groups on hundreds of worlds. The message spreading through the parasite network was simple but revolutionary. The humans are fighting back. The humans can win. The humans want to free us all. For the first time in thousands of years, the enslaved species began to hope. And hope, it turned out, was something the parasites had never learned to control. War Prime Kethmore was facing a crisis unlike anything in Velkaran history. The loss of 3 ships and 1 command vessel was bad enough, but something worse was happening. The host bodies were becoming rebellious. Across the Empire, controlled beings were fighting against their parasites more strongly than ever before. Some were even managing to break free for short periods. The parasite communication network, which had always been perfectly controlled, was now filled with messages of hope and rebellion. "This is impossible," Kethmore raged to his subordinates. "No species has ever inspired rebellion in our hosts. What makes these humans different?" None of the other parasites had an answer. They had conquered hundreds of species, and all had, eventually, submitted completely. But humans seemed to have something that made other species want to fight, even when fighting seemed hopeless. Back on Earth, Admiral Dong Mian was reading reports from across human space. The news was mixed, but encouraging. The battle at Luna had been costly, but it had achieved something more valuable than a military victory. It had proven that the Velkarans could be defeated. More importantly, it had inspired the enslaved species to begin resisting their controllers. Uprisings were breaking out on worlds throughout the Velkaran Empire. Most were quickly crushed, but each one weakened the parasite's control just a little bit more. So Young Choi was already working on improvements to her weapons based on what they had learned in the battle. The electromagnetic pulse devices had worked, but they needed to be more powerful and more precise. "If we can develop a weapon that disrupts the parasites directly," she explained to her team, "we might be able to free the host bodies without killing them." Dr. Ji-Wan was working on the same problem from a biological angle. She had discovered that the parasites had a specific brainwave pattern they used to control their hosts. If that pattern could be disrupted, the hosts might be able to break free. Hyun Woo was rebuilding his fleet with new ships and new tactics. The next battle would be different. Instead of just trying to destroy Velkaran ships, they would try to free the beings inside them. As reports came in from Tae-Ho and the resistance networks, a new strategy began to form. Humanity would not just defend Earth and the remaining colonies. They would go on the offensive, liberating occupied worlds and freeing enslaved species. It was an audacious plan. No species had ever tried to liberate others from Velkaran control. But then, no species had ever been quite like humanity. The war was far from over, but something fundamental had changed. For the first time in thousands of years, the Velkaran Empire was facing an enemy that did not want to just survive. They wanted to free everyone. And across the galaxy, enslaved minds that had given up hope long ago began to believe that freedom might actually be possible. 6 months after the Battle of Luna, everything had changed. Humanity was no longer just defending themselves. They were leading the largest liberation movement in galactic history. Commander Hyun Woo Park stood on the bridge of his new flagship, Liberation. Around him floated a fleet unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human ships flew alongside vessels crewed by freed Threni, Mokari, and Veltar. Each species contributed their own strengths to the growing rebellion. "Commander," Mira reported, "We are receiving confirmation from the ground teams. New Sol has been liberated." Taeho reports that 80% of the population has been freed from parasite control. Hyun-woo smiled. New Sol was the 5th colony they had liberated in the past 3 months. Each victory made the next one easier, as more and more enslaved beings joined their cause. The liberation process had become much more efficient thanks to Dr. Ji-won Kim's breakthrough invention. Working together with So-young Choi, they had developed what they called neural disruptors, devices that could forcibly separate parasites from their host bodies without killing either one. The process was not pleasant for anyone involved. The parasites experienced agony as they were torn from their hosts, while the host bodies went through a painful adjustment period as their nervous systems remembered how to function independently. But it worked, and that was what mattered. The liberated colony of Aurora Station, Taeho Lee had become something he never expected: a diplomat. The survivors from the occupied worlds had chosen him to speak for them, and now he spent his days negotiating with the freed alien species. "The Threnny have agreed to share their biotechnology with us," Taeho reported during a secure communication with Earth. "In exchange, we help them liberate their homeworld. The Makari want to help build our ships, and the Veltar are offering to teach us their advanced navigation techniques." Each species that joined the liberation movement brought new capabilities. The Threnny understood biological systems better than humans, and they helped improve the neural disruptors. The Mokari were incredible engineers who could build things faster and stronger than human technology. The Veltar knew secrets of space travel that allowed the Liberation Fleet to move through the galaxy much more quickly. But the most important contribution came from an unexpected source: the freed parasites themselves. Dr. Ji-won had discovered that not all the parasites wanted to continue their cycle of conquest and control. Some of them, separated from their hosts and facing their own mortality, began to cooperate with their former victims. "We never chose this life," one parasite had communicated to Ji-won through a special device she had built. "Our biology forced us to become controllers, but we remember what it was like to be free beings. We want to find another way to survive." This led to Ji-won's most revolutionary discovery yet. The parasites and their hosts could form a symbiotic relationship instead of a controlling one. If both parties agreed, they could share the same body while both minds remained free and equal. The first successful voluntary symbiosis had been between a Threnny scientist named Velkara and a parasite who had chosen to call itself Hope. Together, they possessed abilities that neither could achieve alone. The Threnny's scientific knowledge combined with the parasite's ability to directly interface with biological systems. "This changes everything," Admiral Dongmin had declared when he heard about the successful symbiosis. "We are not just liberating enslaved species, we are offering the parasites a chance at redemption." Not all parasites were interested in redemption. Warprime Kethmore and his followers still believed that conquest and control were the only way to survive. But a growing number of parasites were choosing to join the liberation movement, bringing with them detailed knowledge of Velkaran technology and tactics. So-young Choi was working with freed Mokari engineers to build a new generation of ships and weapons. The combined human-alien technology was far superior to anything either species could have built alone. "Look at this," So-young said to her mixed team of human and alien engineers, pointing to the design for a new type of ship. "If we combine human creativity with Mokari construction techniques and Threnny biological systems, we can build ships that can adapt and repair themselves during battle." The new ships were like living creatures made of metal and energy. They could change their shape to avoid damage, heal wounds in their hull, and even reproduce some of their own components when needed. Most importantly, they were designed to carry neural disruptors that could free entire ships full of enslaved beings in a single attack. Warprime Kethmore was watching his empire crumble from within. The rebellion that had started with humanity was now spreading to every corner of Velkaran space. Entire sectors were declaring independence, and worse yet, some of his own parasites were abandoning their hosts to join the liberation movement. "How is this possible?" Kethmore demanded of his remaining loyal commanders. We have ruled this galaxy for millennia. No species has ever successfully resisted us for more than a few cycles. The humans are different, War Prime, replied one of his advisors. They do not fight just for themselves. They fight for others. This concept is unprecedented. Kethmore had tried everything to stop the rebellion. He had sent his most powerful fleets against the liberation forces, but the combined human-alien technology was proving superior to pure Velkaran ships. He had attempted to destroy entire worlds rather than lose them to the rebels, but this only made more species join the liberation movement. Most frustrating of all, the humans kept offering mercy to defeated Velkaran forces. Instead of destroying captured parasites, they separated them from their hosts and offered both parties a choice: death, imprisonment, or cooperation in building a new kind of galactic society. Many chose cooperation. Hyanwu's liberation fleet had grown from a few dozen human ships to over 3,000 vessels crewed by representatives of 47 different species. They moved through Velkaran space like a wave of freedom, liberating world after world, but their biggest test was coming. Intelligence reports indicated that Kethmore was gathering his remaining forces for a final stand at the Velkaran capital, world of Dominion Prime. If the liberation movement could free that world, the Parasite Empire would effectively end. This will be our most dangerous mission yet, Hyanwu addressed the combined fleet commanders during a strategy meeting. Dominion Prime is heavily fortified and defended by Kethmore's most loyal forces. But it is also where millions of enslaved beings are being held. The plan was audacious even by human standards. Instead of a direct assault, the Liberation Fleet would attack multiple Velkaran strongholds simultaneously, forcing Kethmore to divide his forces. Then, while the War Prime was distracted, a smaller force would attempt to infiltrate Dominion, prime and use planet-wide neural disruptors to free every enslaved being on the world at once. Tejo volunteered to lead the infiltration team. I started this rebellion hiding in the ruins of New Seoul, he said. It is only fitting that I help finish it by liberating the capital of the empire that destroyed my home. Dr. Jiwon and So Young worked together to build the most powerful neural disruptor ever conceived, one capable of affecting an entire planet. It would require enormous amounts of energy and perfect timing. But if it worked, it could free billions of enslaved minds in a single moment. As the Liberation Fleet prepared for the final assault, beings across the galaxy held their breath. For the first time in thousands of years, it seemed possible that the age of Velkaran domination might actually come to an end. But War Prime Kethmore was not ready to surrender his empire without a fight. He had one final weapon, a doomsday device that could destroy entire star systems. If he could not rule the galaxy, he would rather see it all burn than let other species be free. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine the fate of every living being in the galaxy. On one side stood the liberation movement, fighting for freedom and the right of all species to choose their own destiny. On the other stood the remnants of the Velkaran Empire, desperate to maintain their control no matter the cost. The final battle was about to begin. The final battle began at the edge of the Dominion Prime system. War Prime Kethmore had assembled every remaining loyal ship in the Velkaran Empire, over 300 vessels, all crewed by the most fanatically loyal parasites and their enslaved hosts. Commander Hyanwu watched the enemy fleet through his view screen, knowing that this battle would decide the fate of countless billions of beings across the galaxy. Behind him flew the Liberation Fleet, 3,000 ships crewed by 47 different species, all united by one simple idea: that every thinking being deserved to be free. All ships, this is Commander Park, Hyanwu broadcast to the entire Liberation Fleet. Today we do not fight for conquest or revenge. We fight to give every enslaved being in this galaxy the chance to choose their own destiny. Let's show them what freedom looks like. The space around Dominion Prime erupted in light and fire as the two fleets collided. But this battle was different from all the others. Instead of trying to destroy the Velkaran ships, the Liberation Fleet focused on disabling them and deploying neural disruptors. So Young Choi's latest weapons were incredibly precise. They could target individual parasites within a ship, separating them from their hosts without damaging the vessel itself. Ship after ship in the Velcaran fleet suddenly found their crews freed from parasite control. The freed beings immediately turned their weapons against their former controllers. Threni, Mokari, Veltar, and dozens of other species who had been forced to fight for the Empire now fought for their own liberation. War Prime Kethmore watched in horror as his fleet turned against itself. This was his worst nightmare. Not defeat in battle, but the complete rejection of everything the Velcaran Empire represented. Activate the Omega Protocol, Kethmore commanded his most trusted subordinates. If we cannot rule this galaxy, we will ensure that no one else can either. Deep within Dominion Prime, ancient weapon systems began to power up. The Omega Protocol was the Velcaran's ultimate weapon, a device that could cause the system's star to go supernova, destroying everything within dozens of light years. But Kethmore had not counted on the network of resistance fighters that Teho Lee had built over the past months. Freed beings throughout the system had been working together, sharing information and preparing for this moment. Commander Park, Teho's voice crackled over the communication system. We have intelligence on the enemy's final weapon. They're planning to destroy the entire star system rather than lose it. Hyanwu felt his blood run cold. Billions of innocent beings lived in this system, including the enslaved populations on Dominion Prime itself. The parasites were willing to kill everyone rather than accept defeat. How long do we have? Hyanwu asked. According to our sources inside the planetary defense grid, maybe 2 hours before the weapon reaches critical charge. 2 hours to liberate an entire planet and stop a doomsday weapon. It seemed impossible. But humanity had made a career out of doing impossible things. Dr. Jiwon Kim was already ahead of them. Working with her team of freed parasite scientists, she had modified the planet-wide neural disruptor to work faster than originally planned. Instead of the careful, gradual process they had used on other worlds, this would be a massive shockwave that would separate every parasite on the planet from its host simultaneously. It will be painful for everyone involved, Jiwon warned over the communication link. But it's the only way to free enough beings quickly enough to stop the Omega weapon. Teho led his infiltration team toward the planetary surface while the space battle raged overhead. His team included humans, freed Threni, Mokari engineers, and even several parasites who had chosen redemption over destruction. The irony was not lost on him. He was working alongside the same species that had destroyed his colony, united now by their shared desire for freedom. Disruptor teams, are you in position? Teho asked as his forces spread across the planet's major cities. Ready on all continents, came the replies. We have the devices in place. So Young Choi was coordinating the technical aspects from her ship in orbit. The planet-wide neural disruptor required perfect timing and enormous amounts of energy. Every liberation ship in the fleet was contributing power to the effort. All ships, prepare to transfer energy on my mark, So Young announced. This is going to drain our systems completely, so we'll only get one chance. Admiral Dongmin was overseeing the entire operation from Earth, watching through quantum communication links as humanity's greatest gamble played out. Everything they had worked for over the past year came down to the next few minutes. Execute. Hyunwoo commanded. Energy poured from every ship in the Liberation Fleet, channeled through So Young's ingenious network into the neural disruptors placed across Dominion Prime. The planet itself seemed to glow as waves of disruption energy swept across its surface. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Across the entire world, billions of parasites were suddenly torn from their host bodies. The pain was excruciating for all involved, but for the first time in millennia, the enslaved beings of Dominion Prime were free. The newly freed beings immediately turned against the Omega weapon. Engineers who had been forced to build it now worked frantically to shut it down. Soldiers who had been compelled to guard it instead began dismantling it. But War Prime Kethmore had anticipated this possibility. Deep in his command bunker, he maintained direct control over the weapon's final activation sequence. Even if every other being on the planet turned against him, he could still trigger the destruction of the entire system. If I cannot have this galaxy, Kethmore screamed to his remaining loyal parasites, then no one will. His hand moved toward the final activation control. and stopped. Standing in the doorway of the command bunker was someone Kethmore had never expected to see. Another, parasite, but one who moved with calm confidence rather than desperate fury. "Hello, Kethmore," the parasite said. "My name is Hope. I was once like you, driven by fear and the need to control. But I have learned there is another way." Hope was the parasite who had formed the first successful symbiotic relationship with the Threnny scientist Velkara. Now, they moved and spoke as true partners, demonstrating the possibility that Kethmore had always denied. "This is impossible," Kethmore snarled. "Symbiosis is a myth. We must control or be controlled. There is no other way." "Look around you," Hope replied calmly. "Billions of beings just chose freedom over safety, cooperation over control. The galaxy is changing, Kethmore. You can change with it or you can be left behind." For a moment, War Prime Kethmore hesitated. In that moment of doubt, Tae-Ho Lee and his infiltration team burst into the command bunker. But instead of weapons, they carried neural disruptors set to the gentlest possible setting. "War Prime Kethmore," Tae-Ho said, "you have a choice. You can activate that weapon and murder billions of innocent beings, including your own enslaved hosts. Or you can let us separate you from your host peacefully, and you can choose what kind of being you want to be." Kethmore looked around the bunker. His loyal followers were wavering, seeing the example of Hope and beginning to question everything they had believed. "What guarantee do I have that you will not simply execute us?" Kethmore asked. "The same guarantee we have given every other parasite who chose cooperation." Hyunwoo's voice came through the communication system. "A chance to make amends for the past and help build a better future. War Prime Kethmore, ruler of a galactic empire, conqueror of 1,000 worlds, looked at his hand hovering over the activation control. With that single movement he could destroy everything, or he could choose something else entirely. Slowly, Kethmore moved his hand away from the control. "I choose to see what this freedom looks like," he said quietly. The separation process was gentler than any that had been performed before. Dr. Ji-Won herself oversaw the procedure, ensuring that both Kethmore and his host body survived intact. When it was complete, two beings stood where one had been before. A parasite who had ruled a galaxy, and a Veltar scientist who had been enslaved for centuries. The Veltar, whose name was Kelvan, spoke first. "I have been trapped in my own mind for 300 years, forced to watch as my body was used to conquer and destroy. But I do not hate you," he said to Kethmore. "I pity you. You were trapped too in your own way." Kethmore, smaller and more vulnerable than he had ever been, looked up at the beings surrounding him. "What happens to me now?" "Now," said Admiral Dongmin, speaking from Earth, "you help us undo the damage that was done. You help us free the remaining enslaved worlds, and you help us find a way to heal your dying home galaxy." Because that was what Dr. Ji-Won had discovered in the final weeks before the battle. The expanding darkness that had driven the parasites from their home galaxy could be stopped, but it would require the cooperation of hundreds of species working together. It would require exactly the kind of galactic alliance that humanity had made possible. 1 year later, Hyunwoo Park commanded not a military fleet, but an exploration and rescue fleet. Instead of liberating enslaved worlds, they were now seeking out new species to invite into the Galactic Freedom Alliance. Tae-Ho Lee had become Earth's first ambassador to the Alliance Council, representing not just humanity, but all species who believed in the right to choose their own destiny.